My husband didn't even look up from his phone when he told me his ex would be at our Christmas dinner. My ex will be at Christmas dinner. Try not to make it awkward. Behave yourself for once, Maggie. He said it like he was asking me to pick up dry cleaning, not inviting a ghost into our home, like my reaction was already a joke to him. I was standing on a step stool in our Lincoln Park condo, holding our wedding photo in both hands, trying to re-hang it after wiping a streak of dust from the frame. At his words, my fingers slipped. The frame hit the hardwood with a sharp crack. Glass splintered across our smiling faces, a jagged line separating his body from mine. "Careful," Ethan said mildly, still scrolling. That was expensive. Not, "Are you okay?" Just a reminder about the price tag. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had someone talk down to you in your own home. I climbed down, my legs shaking. My hands were still damp from the dishes I'd just washed, the kitchen towel clutched between my fingers. The smell of lemon soap clung to my skin, mixing with the burn of his scotch. "She's flying in early," Ethan went on, as if we were talking about the weather. "I told Sloane we'd make room at the table. She's important to me. I need you to be mature about this, Sloane." He said her name softly, like it tasted better than mine. "Sure," I heard myself say. My voice came out smooth, almost bored. "Whatever you need." My nails dug into my palm so hard my skin went hot, then numb. On the coffee table, his crystal glass caught the overhead light, amber liquid rocking with every careless flick of his wrist. "Behave yourself for once." I bent to pick up the cracked photo frame. Tiny shards of glass glittered on the floor between us. As I straightened, my phone buzzed in my back pocket. A notification slid across the lock screen. Guest list, Christmas dinner. I opened it and scrolled past the names Ethan already knew. At the very bottom, where he'd never think to look, sat one last entry. D. Archer. Private. Waiting in silence. If you looked at us from the outside, me and Ethan, you'd think we were the kind of couple that magazines love to put on the last page, Chicago's golden pair, framed by rooftop views and perfect lighting. People forget that lighting can be manipulated. Shadows, too. Before all of this, before the glass shattered and before I learned how tightly silence can choke a person, there was a version of our life that almost felt gentle. I replay it sometimes, not because I miss it, but because understanding where things broke helps me understand why I stayed. I met Ethan Caldwell at a gala I was coordinating, an annual fundraiser for a literacy nonprofit. I still remember the clatter of rentals being unloaded, the flicker of string lights being tested, the metallic scent of fresh-cut florals filling the ballroom. I was in my zone. Clipboard, earpiece, a dozen people calling my name every minute. And then, there he was. Tall, clean-cut, the kind of man who walked like he always knew exactly where he was going. He asked if I needed help carrying a box. I had seen plenty of men in suits offer help as a form of flirting. But Ethan actually carried the box. He didn't drop it on the nearest table and disappear. He took it exactly where I pointed, then asked if I wanted him to move anything else. It sounds small, but when your life is constant crisis management, someone listening is intoxicating. Back then, his smile wasn't condescending. It was warm, real, or I thought it was. For the first year, he made me feel seen in ways I hadn't realized I was starving for. He remembered how I took my coffee. He'd surprise me with takeout after long events. He sat on the floor of my apartment helping me fold linens for the next day's wedding setup, laughing when he messed up the fancy folds. "You make chaos look elegant," he once said. I saved that line in my notes app. I don't know why. Maybe because those words died long before the relationship did. His family lake house in Wisconsin was where I first imagined a forever with him. We spent a weekend there, that first summer sunlight bouncing off the lake, his hand resting on my knee as we drove up the winding gravel path. His mother greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but I was too love-struck to notice anything sharp about it. We grilled by the water, played cards, drank wine. It was simple, clean, soft, before money, power, and control sucked the oxygen from our walls. The shift didn't happen overnight. It was slow, invasive, like mold growing behind drywall, quiet, until the smell becomes impossible to ignore. It began with tiny comments. That dress is a bit loud for a corporate dinner. You don't need to hang out with them. They're not our crowd. Then came the little corrections. Don't say that in front of my parents. Try not to laugh too loudly. My dad's sensitive about decorum. Then the bigger corrections. You work too much. You're exhausted all the time. Let me take care of you. I make enough for both of us, Maggie. Isn't that what you want? I didn't realize how deeply I was folding into his preferences until the day I found myself standing in front of my closet, holding a bright red dress I loved, and putting it back because I could already hear his voice saying it was too much. My career event planning was something people underestimate until they see the chaos behind the scenes. It's not glamorous. It's stress, layered on stress, built on deadlines and perfectionism and last-second disasters. But it made me feel capable, alive, like I could take 1,000 mismatched pieces and make them into something beautiful. When Ethan suggested, gently, lovingly, persistently, that I quit, I thought he was trying to protect me from burnout. I didn't know until much later, thanks to Rosa, that he had quietly called my boss more than once, telling him I was missing details, that I seemed scattered, that the job was wearing me down. Of course my boss stopped giving me the big clients. Of course I felt inadequate, tired, behind. I thought I was failing. I never imagined someone I loved would sabotage me to make me more dependent. After I quit, Ethan's mother hosted a dinner to celebrate my new chapter. She raised her glass and said, "Maggie finally understands what it means to support a man like Ethan. Not every woman is willing to prioritize family like that." Family. Meaning theirs. Meaning him. I smiled at the table while something inside me curled in on itself. I didn't know then that these were the first threads of a net designed to catch me if I ever tried to leave. The thing about control is that it doesn't arrive with a slammed door or a raised fist. It arrives with a soft voice, a warm hand, and a sentence that sounds like concern. I didn't see the pattern forming because Ethan didn't need to be loud. He already knew I was someone who tried to make things work. Someone who believed that love meant adjusting, softening, compromising. After I left my job, my days became a loop of errands, meal prepping, and waiting. Waiting for Ethan to come home. Waiting for the right moment to ask how his day was. Waiting for him to be in a good mood so I could feel like I still mattered in the world. When you revolve your life around someone else's orbit long enough, you forget you were ever a planet yourself. The condo in Lincoln Park was beautiful in that cold, curated way wealthy people love. Glass, steel, soft gray walls, spotless surfaces, the kind of place where one misplaced cup feels like a moral failing. I decorated it with pieces I thought he'd like: minimalist vases, black and white prints, neutral throw blankets. I stopped buying colorful things because he once made a face when I brought home a yellow pillow. He didn't say not to. He just wrinkled his nose and said, "Bold choice," and I returned it the next day. Our routines were predictable. He woke at 6, gym, black coffee, CNBC in the background. I made breakfast he rarely ate. He left with a kiss on my hair, not my lips. I cleaned a house already clean. I walked to the market for fresh herbs I didn't need. I pretended I loved the quiet. The truth? The quiet terrified me. Quiet meant invisibility. It meant being unneeded, unwanted. Still, I tried to twist the quiet into something hopeful. I told myself I was resetting my life, preparing for someday returning to work. But every time I mentioned taking a part-time job just to feel useful again, Ethan had a reason it wasn't the right moment. "We have that trip coming up. Mom needs us at the lake house. Let's enjoy this time before life gets chaotic again." Or the worst one, "Don't worry about money. I've got you." That sounds loving until you realize it's locking the cage. One afternoon, I actually booked an interview. It was for a small boutique event firm, nothing big, just a way to stretch my muscles again. The morning I was supposed to go, Ethan texted me that he was bringing clients home for dinner and needed the house perfect. I canceled the interview because I thought supporting him was the right thing. I told myself another opportunity would come. It didn't, because I stopped looking. Meanwhile, his criticism sharpened in ways that were so subtle, I didn't recognize them as cuts. "You didn't iron this right. That's not how my mom makes it. Try to be less emotional when we're with my team." You embarrassed me a little tonight. Embarrassed him for existing imperfectly. The night that phrase lodged itself in my spine, we were at a company dinner, one of those overpriced steakhouse nights where men laugh too loudly about things they'd never say sober. His boss's wife complimented my earrings and asked where I worked. I smiled and said I was in between things right now. Ethan cut in before I could finish. She's taking a break. She gets overwhelmed easily. The table chuckled politely, the way people chuckle when they think they're being kind. I laughed too, even though it felt like something inside me cracked, maybe the same way the photo frame would one day crack on our floor. When we got home, I cried in the bathroom with the faucet running. When I walked out, Ethan looked at my puffy face and said, "Are we doing this?" It wasn't that serious, I apologized. For being hurt, for being small, for being me. It wasn't until months later that the resentment turned into something heavier, something like grief. Not grief for him, grief for myself, for the woman I'd stopped being. The symbols of my life shrunk too. The bright dresses in my closet faded into the background, worn only inside the house. The framed photo from our engagement was moved from the living room to the hallway, then to the bedroom shelf, then to a drawer. The key to the safe holding my prenup, my grandmother's letters, became something I touched less and less, as though forgetting it made it less real. But symbols don't disappear just because you avoid them. They wait. They whisper. The whisper got louder the day I found out the truth months later, long after the kindness had vanished, long after I'd convinced myself this was normal. Back then, though, I was still playing the part, still trying. Still pretending the quiet was peace and not the warning before a storm. And the storm was already forming quiet, electric, inevitable, just beneath the surface of our perfect life. The night everything snapped didn't look dramatic from the outside. No slammed doors, no shattered glass. Just the glow of Ethan's phone lighting up our dark bedroom at 1:12 a.m., vibrating against the nightstand like a warning I'd been trying not to hear. He was asleep beside me, back turned, breathing even and careless. I didn't mean to look. I wasn't hunting for anything. But when the screen lit up, the message preview glowed bright enough to slice through the dark. SP. Can't wait to finally spend Christmas together. She still has no clue. My stomach dropped so fast I felt weightless. For a moment I couldn't breathe. Then I picked up the phone with fingers that didn't feel like mine. The thread was already open. Years of habit of not snooping, of trusting made my hands shake as I scrolled. Hotel rooms. Business trips. Inside jokes about me. Plans, real plans, Ethan and Sloane talking like they were building a life together, strategizing how to push me toward filing first. Screenshots of chats with his lawyer about timing the prenup. And then the line that changed everything. Daniel thinks I'm single. He'd never suspect anything, Daniel Archer. Ethan's founding partner, the man he admired more than his own father. And Sloane was playing him too. The betrayal stung. But the stupidity? That lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. I put the phone down slowly. I didn't cry, didn't scream, didn't shake him awake and demand answers. I just went still, cold, sharp, clear. It was like a switch flipped. The version of me Ethan preferred, the quiet one, the easy one, died in that moment. I went to the kitchen, opened the drawer where we kept the safe key, and held it in my palm. The metal felt colder than the tile floor beneath my feet. If Ethan wanted strategy, fine. He would get strategy. My plan formed fast, clean, precise. Find the prenup. Photograph everything. Contact a lawyer privately. Hire someone who could dig deeper than I ever could. Someone like a PI. Use the one thing Ethan valued more than marriage. Reputation. And at Christmas dinner the night he thought he'd humiliate me, I'd let the truth speak for itself. No screaming. No begging. No warning. Just consequences. The morning after I read those messages, the world looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The air in our condo was too clean, too still, like the silence after a gunshot. Ethan made coffee like he always did, scrolling emails with one hand, tie draped over his shoulder. He didn't notice the way I watched him. Not with hurt this time, but with calculation. He kissed the top of my head, told me he'd be home late, and walked out the door with the confidence of a man who believed he controlled every variable in his life. The door clicked shut. I exhaled. The performance began. My first call was to a lawyer named Allison Kerr, recommended quietly by a friend of a friend who whispered the name like a secret. Allison didn't do small talk. "What do you need?" she asked the moment she answered. "I need to get out of my marriage without being destroyed," I said. There was a pause, then a low hum. "Good. People who know exactly what they want are easier to help." She told me to bring every document I had, every detail, every suspicion. She told me not to confront Ethan. "Silence is leverage," she said. "Use it." I booked the appointment. Then I called the second name on my list, given to me by a woman I'd met briefly at a bridal shower and never forgotten. Rosa Martinez, former Chicago PD, turned private investigator. Rosa had a reputation for finding truths that people paid good money to bury. She agreed to meet me at a coffee shop in Wicker Park, one of those indie spots with worn leather chairs, mismatched mugs, and a neon sign that said, "Stay wild." I chose a table in the corner. My hands trembled around my cup. Rosa arrived exactly on time. Short hair, black jacket, eyes sharp enough to cut through stone. She sat across from me like she already knew my story. "You're Maggie," she said. I nodded. "And your Rosa depends on the day," she deadpanned, then softened just slightly. "Let's talk about your husband." I told her everything. The texts, the years of pressure, the quiet corrections, the prenup. Sloan. And the name Daniel Archer, how it appeared like a dropped match in the middle of a dry field. Rosa didn't react dramatically. She simply took notes, tapping her pen every time something clicked. "People like your husband get sloppy when they're comfortable," she said. "Good for us, bad for him." She explained her process. Surveillance, digital pulls, camera logs, financial tracking. All legal, all discreet, but once you start this, she warned, you can't unsee what we find. I signed anyway, not out of anger, but clarity. When I walked out of the coffee shop, something inside me felt lighter, not healed, not happy, but awake, like stepping out of a dark movie theater into sun. The next few weeks unfolded like a quiet montage, my outer life unchanged, my inner life transformed. I played the dutiful wife perfectly. Grocery lists, dinner prep, holiday candles, smiling when Ethan wanted me to, listening to him talk about work, pretending not to notice when he came home smelling like cologne that wasn't mine, pretending not to see Sloane's name flash on his phone while he showered. But underneath, every day was strategy. Every hour was information. Rosa sent updates and discreet signals, never texts with details, just emojis that looked meaningless. A red circle meant she'd gotten a copy of building entry logs. A star meant she'd captured new photos. A lightning bolt meant money was moving in places it shouldn't. But the day she sent me a snowflake emoji, she finally called, "We need to talk in person." "Is it bad?" I asked. "It's useful," she replied. "Meet me at her office." A converted loft above a tattoo shop. Rosa pulled up images on her laptop. Ethan and Sloane entering a hotel, a parking garage, a dinner where she leaned across the table, touching his hand like she owned him. None of that surprised me. But what did? A spreadsheet Rosa slid across the desk. "This," she said, pointing with her pen, "is a donation log from your husband's firm's charity project. Except some of the donations didn't go to the charity. They went somewhere else. Someone rerouted funds. My bloodstream iced over. Who? Looks like your husband and Daniel Archer have been moving money together. And Sloane's been involved." I stared. "She's sleeping with them both, and tied to their finances." Rosa nodded. "She's smarter than he thinks. Or she thinks she is. And Ethan's sloppier than he thinks. That's good. We can use that." I walked home numb. Not destroyed, just quiet, the kind of quiet that comes before a storm breaks open. Later that night, after Ethan went to bed, I opened the safe with the tiny silver key he never bothered to hide. My prenup lay inside, tucked behind old tax forms. I read every line, every clause, every loophole. The adultery clause was buried deep page 17, subsection 3. Ethan signed it because he never imagined he'd need it. He always thought he would be the one in control. I photographed everything, page by page. The light from my phone cast long shadows across the documents, making the lines look like roads leading me somewhere I'd forgotten how to reach. The next day, I met with Allison. She flipped through the prenup with the precision of a surgeon. "He's overconfident," she said. Men like him forget what they sign. This works in your favor. Can I win? You won't just win, she said, closing the folder with a soft thud. You'll take back everything he tried to shrink. Back home, I found myself doing something I hadn't done in years, rearranging my closet. I pulled out all the bright clothes I'd pushed into the back, the red dress, the floral skirt, the mustard yellow sweater Ethan hated. I put them front and center, not because I planned to wear them right away, but because looking at them reminded me who I used to be: colorful, loud, alive. Naomi, my sister, noticed the shift immediately when she came over one afternoon. You look different, she said, squinting at me. How? Like you finally remembered you're not furniture. I laughed, truly laughed, for the first time in months. Naomi didn't ask questions. She didn't dig. She simply sat beside me on the couch, leaned her head on my shoulder, and said, "Whatever you're doing, I'm here." It wasn't healing, but it was something close, because for the first time in a long time, I felt the ground under my feet again, and I wasn't done rising. The deeper I sank into my plan, the more invisible Ethan became to his own destruction. He thought he'd well-trained me to be quiet, to be predictable, to be grateful for crumbs. He didn't notice the way I listened differently. He didn't catch the moments where my answers were too smooth, too agreeable. That's the thing about men like Ethan. They stop looking closely once they think they own you. About a week into Rosa's investigation, the shifts inside our apartment became impossible to ignore. Not for him, he stayed oblivious, but for me. I started hearing things I used to tune out. The click of his watch hitting the counter, the heavy sigh he gave when I didn't respond fast enough, the hollow thud when he dropped his gym bag by the door. Every sound felt like punctuation in a sentence I was finally learning to read correctly. He'd walk in and assume I had nothing going on, because that's what he wanted from me. So when he found me writing at the dining table lists, plans, notes, he'd ask, "What are you working on?" Just things I'd say, with a smile that hid entire battlefields. Meanwhile, Rosa kept pulling threads. Each one led to a new unraveling. One afternoon, she called me from her car. The engine hummed beneath her voice. "We've got another piece," she said. "What is it?" Caught them leaving a condo in River North. Not a hotel. Not Sloane's place either. A third place. Looks like it. And here's the kicker. It's under Archer's name. My breath stilled. "You're sure?" Rosa scoffed softly. "I don't guess. I confirm, so Daniel had a secret condo, and Sloane had been there with Ethan. The layers of betrayal tangled so deeply it was almost poetic, if poetry were made of knives. But the most important shift wasn't theirs. It was mine. I woke up earlier, not because Ethan did, but because I wanted to feel my own life before his shadow walked into it. I started jogging at dawn, the cold Chicago air burning my lungs in ways that felt honest, real. I forgot how freeing it was to move my body without feeling watched or judged. After a few runs, I texted Naomi, "Want to join me tomorrow morning?" She wrote back immediately, "Absolutely not. But I'll come over after with donuts." And she did. She showed up in pajamas, hair wild, holding a pink box of donuts like a peace offering. We sat on the floor, eating maple bars while sunlight spilled into the room, and for the first time in almost a year, I felt something like joy. Naomi looked around the condo. "You're changing things," she said, noticing the new throw blanket, the candles, the plants. "I'm restoring things," I corrected, because it no longer felt like Ethan's space I lived in. It felt like the space I would soon reclaim. Rosa's biggest breakthrough came in mid-December. I had just set groceries on the counter when she texted me a single emoji, the lightning bolt. That one meant money movement unexpected, suspicious. Then she called. "You need to see this in person," she said, "and bring your lawyer." I met Rosa and Allison in the investigator's office. Rosa spread documents across the table. Bank statements, transaction logs, financial transfers from the charity Ethan's firm bragged about on every holiday card. Allison scanned the documents like she had X-ray vision. "This isn't just shady," she said. "It's sloppy," Rosa added. "Someone wanted these transactions hidden, but didn't know how to hide money well." Classic amateur move. The numbers told a story I hadn't expected, a story that went beyond infidelity. Ethan and Daniel had been rerouting small but consistent amounts of money to a private account. And Sloane? She had access. Why would she have access to their financials? I asked. Allison raised an eyebrow. Because she's sleeping with them, or because she's planning something bigger, or because they're dumber than they look. Pick one. Rosa clicked her pen. You want to bring down a man like Ethan? You don't use heartbreak. You use paperwork. The plan sharpened. The stakes rose. And for the first time, his betrayal felt less like a wound and more like leverage. That night, Ethan came home late. I was on the couch, notebook open again. He loosened his tie and said, "You're always writing lately. Helps me think." I said, "What about myself?" He blinked at that, confused, maybe even threatened for a second. But then he dismissed it. "Just don't overthink things," he said, kissing the top of my head before walking away. I almost laughed at how perfect the moment was. He had no idea he was talking to a woman who had already built the blueprint of his downfall. Around this time, Daniel finally responded to the anonymous email I'd sent. Weeks had passed since my first message, and part of me believed he'd chosen to ignore it, or worse, cover it up quietly. But one night, as I prepped dinner, an email popped up. Subject: "We need to talk." Message: "If what you sent me is true, I need everything you have. Don't respond here. Tell me a safe place to meet." My heart pounded, because this wasn't just about Sloane anymore. It was about Ethan, their firm, their secrets, their lies. I sent a time and place. Simple, precise, neutral. The meeting was illuminating. I didn't expect Daniel to look so human. Not the polished titan from corporate events. This version looked tired, jaw clenched with betrayal he wasn't ready to show. When I laid the evidence between us, he stared for a long, heavy moment. "She told me she loved me," he said finally. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. He whispered, "I didn't know, but I did." Men like Daniel always learn the truth last. Not because the signs aren't there, but because they believe they're immune. He exhaled sharply. "I'm in." 2 words that changed the direction of my plan. And just like that, I wasn't fighting alone. In the days that followed, my confidence grew, not in a loud, cinematic way, but in a steady pulse under my skin. A hum of power I hadn't felt since my earliest days as an event planner, fixing chaos with a clipboard and sheer stubborn will. I saw Ethan's mistakes more clearly. The missed buttons on his shirts when he rushed, the half-written notes he forgot to hide, the lies he told without realizing he'd repeated a different version the day before. And Sloane, careless, arrogant, grew bolder. She texted him openly, called him when he was home, told him she wanted Christmas, done right this time. Every sloppy move fed my momentum. Every mistake became a stepping stone. Because while Ethan and Sloane were building a fantasy, I was building an ending. And for the first time in a long time, I felt myself rising from the version of me he tried to shrink. I wasn't healed, but I was no longer breakable. Progress feels powerful until the universe tests you to see if you really meant it. And in December, the tests came fast, sharp, and perfectly timed. Like someone somewhere was whispering, "Are you sure you're ready for this?" It started with Ethan acting different, not better, just different. Too attentive, too careful, too polite. The kind of niceness that smelled like guilt and tasted like manipulation. One evening, he walked through the door carrying a glossy blue shopping bag. "Tiffany, I got you something," he said, voice too casual. He'd never randomly bought me gifts. Not once. I opened the box. A pair of diamond studs. Classic, cold, impersonal. "They're beautiful," I said. He smiled. "Thought you deserved something nice. You've been good lately." Good. Like a pet. Like a child who finally stopped asking questions. This wasn't affection. This was pressure dressed up in jewelry. He began coming home earlier, 2 once, at a full 6 p.m., which practically qualified as a federal emergency. He'd pour 2 glasses of wine, sit across from me, and ask about my day like he actually cared. It would have fooled the old me. But now, every question was reconnaissance. Worse, Sloane started getting bold in public. That was the part I didn't expect. A week after Daniel agreed to help, I ran into her in the lobby of Ethan's building. The elevator doors opened, and there she stood, hair curled, lips painted deep plum, wearing a coat I recognized from an Instagram post. She'd captioned, "Power looks better in winter." She looked me up and down slowly. "Maggie," she said, tone bright but eyes sharp. "Didn't think I'd see you here today." "I live here," I replied. She laughed. "Right, of course. I forget sometimes. Forget." She forgets I live in my own home. Then she leaned in with a whisper sweet enough to rot teeth. "Ethan's been under a lot of stress. Be good to him." "Okay, be good." I held her gaze. "Don't worry. I take excellent care of what's mine." Her smile twitched. "You're cute," she said, "and you're predictable," I answered. She blinked, thrown off for a split second, and in that moment, I realized something important. Sloane wasn't as in control as she acted, but trouble wasn't just circling outside. It seeped into the cracks inside the walls of our perfect condo. 3 days after the elevator incident, I noticed Ethan changing his passwords. Not casually, not forgetting them, changing them. Every single one. He usually hummed while he typed, a little habit he'd never noticed about himself. But that night, he hunched over his laptop, shoulders tight, eyes darting like something or someone had warned him to lock things down. When he went to shower, I walked past his desk. Phone. Passcode updated. Laptop. New login. Email. 2-factor authentication added. This wasn't paranoia. This was preparation. I texted Rosa. "He's changing everything," she replied. "He's spooked, but not enough. I already pulled what we need, but still, the timing made my skin crawl. If Ethan sensed even a whisper of what I was planning, everything could fall apart. I had one chance to dismantle his lies, one chance to make the truth undeniable. Naomi came over that night, saw the tension in my shoulders, and said, "Tell me what's going on." I shook my head. "Not yet." She pointed at my face. "You look like someone who's holding her breath underwater." "Maybe I am." "Then come up for air," she snapped softly, "or you'll drown before the finish line." Her worry wasn't loud, but it landed heavy. Then came Daniel, cold feet and all. A week before Christmas, he emailed me again. Short, blunt. "We should hold off. Too risky. Too public." Too public? That was the point. I read the email 3 times, pulse pounding so hard I felt it in my teeth. Without his presence at dinner, without Lydia, the entire impact would collapse. It wouldn't be a reckoning anymore. It would just be a messy revelation Ethan could spin however he wanted. I met Daniel the next day, in the same quiet cafe where Rosa had first slid evidence across the table. He looked worn, eyes bloodshot, jaw clenched like he hadn't slept. "Maggie, I need you to understand. This could ruin me." I leaned in. "She already ruined you." He didn't argue. He just stared at his hands. "I don't want a scandal," he whispered. "Then you shouldn't have chosen a woman who thrives in them." His jaw twitched. "She used us both," I continued. "You can let her walk away clean, or you can expose the truth and get your life back." He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't move. So I stood. "Decide soon, because I will not be collateral damage in your silence." Half an hour after I left, he texted one line. "I'm in. Lydia too." But complications weren't done circling, not even close. That same night, while I was chopping vegetables for dinner, Ethan walked in, smelling faintly of whiskey and Sloane's floral perfume. He watched me cook like he was waiting for something. "You've been acting strange," he said. I kept cutting. "Strange, how quiet." I let out a soft laugh. "You like me quiet?" He frowned. "Not this quiet." My knife stilled. He stepped closer. "Are we okay?" That one question, a question he hadn't asked in years, almost cracked me open. Because it wasn't love, it wasn't concern, it was fear. He felt something shifting. He just didn't know what. I whispered, "We're fine." He exhaled, relieved, and for the first time, I felt the power of a lie told at the right moment. The complications were piling up. Sloane's arrogance, Ethan's paranoia, Daniel's hesitation, Naomi's worry, but the storm wasn't ready to break yet. It was building pressure, tightening its grip, waiting for Christmas. December tightened around me like a noose. Every day felt like walking across thin ice, hearing cracks beneath my feet, but having no choice except to keep going. The closer we got to Christmas, the more unpredictable Ethan became, as if some instinct buried deep inside him was finally waking up. Small things went off first. He'd misplace his keys and get irritated at me even though I hadn't touched them. He'd forget meetings and blame the holiday chaos, even though he used to brag about never missing a deadline. He'd snap at telemarketers, then immediately pretend he hadn't. But it was the nights that revealed the most. He'd toss and turn, sighing heavily, mumbling half-formed sentences. Once, I heard him mutter Sloane's name under his breath. Another night, he woke suddenly, sat on the edge of the bed, and pressed both hands to his face. "Everything okay?" I whispered. He nodded, though he didn't sound convinced. "Just work stuff. Work. Right. The kind of work that came wrapped in lipstick and lies." Meanwhile, Sloane escalated in a way that felt almost reckless. She texted Ethan more openly, even when he was home. Once, while we were watching a movie, his phone buzzed with a message preview that read, "Miss you. You okay? You seemed tense earlier." He locked his screen so fast it was almost funny. I sipped my wine and pretended not to notice. But tension took on a new shape when someone else entered the picture, someone I didn't expect. Lydia Archer, Daniel's wife. One afternoon, while Ethan was at work, I got a text from an unknown number. "Is this Maggie?" "Yes." "Who's this?" "It's Lydia." Daniel told me everything. Then a minute later, "We need to meet." I agreed, though my stomach twisted at the idea. I wasn't sure what kind of woman Lydia was, fragile, furious, vengeful, or something else entirely. We met at a quiet cafe near the lake. She arrived in a camel coat, her hair perfectly styled, her movements slow and controlled like she'd practiced every step before entering the room. Her eyes, though God, her eyes were hollow. She sat across from me and didn't speak for a full minute. Finally, she said, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know it was this." "I'm sorry," I whispered, even though none of it was my fault. She shook her head. "Don't apologize for what you didn't break. We talked for nearly an hour." She confessed things Daniel had never mentioned, fights about late hours, gaps in stories, disappearing credit card charges. She thought he was having an affair with someone powerful. She didn't imagine the woman would be, "I don't even know what to call her," Lydia said quietly. "A parasite? A fantasy? A career move?" When she stood to leave, Lydia placed her hand on mine. "Whatever you're planning," she said, "I'll be there. I don't want to stay married to a man who let someone like her walk into our life." Her resolve strengthened mine. But complications don't always come from villains. Sometimes they come from the people who love you most. Naomi started sensing truths I wasn't ready to say out loud. She came over with groceries, cleaning supplies, donuts, anything she could use as an excuse to check on me. One night, while we made pasta together, she watched me a little too closely. "You're different," she said. "How you move like someone who's planning something." I froze. She saw it. Naomi put down the wooden spoon. "Just tell me what's going on. I'm your sister. I see you." My throat tightened. "I will. Soon." "That's not good enough," she snapped. "You're scaring me." Her voice cracked on the last word. That almost broke me. Almost. But I couldn't risk her knowing yet. Not until every piece was aligned. I hugged her and whispered, "Trust me." She didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "Don't let him hurt you again." I promised her I wouldn't. It was the first promise I fully intended to keep. The final complication, the one that nearly derailed everything, came 4 nights before Christmas. Ethan came home unexpectedly early. I was in the spare room sorting documents, evidence, receipts, my entire war chest spread across the desk. I heard the front door open and nearly panicked. I shoved files into drawers, closed laptop tabs, straightened papers, and walked into the hallway. He stood there in his coat, eyes narrowed. "You weren't in the kitchen," he said. "I was organizing the closet," I replied smoothly. He stared at me for a long, unsettling moment. Then he said, "We need to talk." My pulse spiked. "About what, us?" He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "I feel like you're pulling away." If he knew how right he was. If he knew how far I'd already gone. He reached for my hand. "Maggie, if something's wrong, tell me." and for a moment, just a flicker, I felt the ghost of the man I once loved, the one who carried boxes at my gala, who folded linens on my floor, who made me feel seen. But ghosts can't fix the living, and love can't resurrect the dead. I squeezed his hand, then let go. "We're fine," I whispered. He believed me, or he pretended to. Either way, the moment passed, and Christmas drew closer, wrapped in lights and lies. The night before Christmas Eve, Ethan headed to bed early. I stayed up wrapping gifts, some real, some props, for the dinner that would change everything. As I arranged the table settings, a strange calm settled over me. Everything was in motion now. Everyone was in place. All that remained was timing. At midnight, my phone buzzed with a new message. From Daniel, "Everything is ready. We'll see you tomorrow." This time, I didn't feel fear. I felt certainty. The complications had pushed me, tested me, cornered me, but they hadn't broken me. They'd sharpened me. Christmas Day arrived, looking deceptively peaceful. If you've ever lived through the day your life explodes, you know what I mean. The sky doesn't cloud over dramatically. The city doesn't go quiet. The universe doesn't send you a warning label. It looks normal, almost painfully so. Chicago was wrapped in that gray winter light that makes everything look like it's been desaturated a few notches. Snow from the week before clung to the edges of sidewalks, pushed into gray piles by plows and boots. From our 15th floor windows, Lincoln Park looked like a postcard. White paths, dark tree branches, families bundled up in two puffy coats. Inside our condo, it smelled like garlic and rosemary and butter, like the idealized version of Christmas I'd once wanted to build with Ethan. I woke before he did, heart hammering before my feet even hit the floor. It wasn't nerves, not exactly. It was adrenaline on a slow drip. My body knew what was coming, even if my brain was pretending we were just hosting dinner. Down the hall, I could hear Ethan's soft snore. Once upon a time, that sound had comforted me. Proof I wasn't alone. Today it just sounded like arrogance, how deeply a man could sleep when he believed he'd already won. I moved through the morning on autopilot, prime rib rubbed and slow roasting in the oven, potatoes boiling, Brussels sprouts tossed with olive oil and sea salt on a tray. The wedding china, his mother's choice, not mine, gleamed on the dining table under the soft overhead light. Crystal glasses caught the glow from the tree. 7 place settings. I'd polished each fork like I was preparing weapons, not cutlery. Ethan shuffled in around 10, hair sticking up, wearing the navy robe I bought him our first Christmas as husband and wife. "Wow," he said, glancing at the table. "You went all out." "Of course I did. I always did." That was my role in his life. Coordinator, smoother of edges, creator of illusions. I tightened the knot on my apron. "It's Christmas." He walked over, slid his arms around my waist from behind, and kissed the top of my head. The gesture used to feel intimate. Now it felt like a hand on the back of my neck. "You're the best," he murmured. Seriously, I smiled over my shoulder. "I know." He didn't hear the steel under the words. He poured himself coffee, scrolled his phone, and said, "Sloane's excited. She texted me last night, said she can't believe you've been so cool about everything." Cool. Right. I turned back to the stove so he wouldn't see my face. "Why wouldn't I be?" He snorted. "You'd be surprised how many women would make it weird, having their husband's ex at Christmas." I almost laughed. If only he knew how weird it was about to get. He noticed the extra chairs then. 6, he expected. Me, him, Sloane, Naomi, maybe 1 or 2 strays he'd mentioned inviting from work if they were alone for the holidays, but there were 7. He frowned slightly. "Did you add another place? Naomi might bring someone?" I lied smoothly. "She hasn't decided." He shrugged, already moving on. The level of faith he had in my compliance was almost impressive. If you don't think someone is capable of rebellion, you never double-check the exits. The late morning blurred into afternoon. I basted the meat, checked the rolls, adjusted the table runner. Small motions, tiny details. It felt like prepping for an event, except this time, I was both the planner and the detonator. At 1, Naomi showed up with a bottle of champagne in one hand and a small overnight bag in the other. "Backup plan," she said when I raised an eyebrow at the bag. "If this night goes the way I think it might, you're not sleeping here alone." Her eyes searched mine. She still didn't know the full script, but she could sense the magnitude of what was coming. "You sure you want to be here?" I asked. She snorted. "Are you kidding? Front row seats to Ethan finally getting what he deserves? I've been waiting 4 years." She hugged me in the kitchen, long and tight. "Whatever happens, I've got you," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "Just, when things start, don't try to stop it." Her gaze sharpened. "Define things. You'll know," I said softly. "Just keep your phone charged." Naomi studied me for another long beat, then nodded once. "Okay. I trust you." The afternoon slid by in slow motion. Ethan put on some Christmas playlist, jazzy versions of carols that felt too bright for the air in the room. He opened a bottle of red for cooking, then poured himself a glass. Every few minutes, he checked his watch, then his phone, waiting for her. I set out the appetizers, baked brie, olives, little toasts, and arranged them on a platter like this was any other dinner. That was the strangest part, how normal it all looked. If you'd walked in at 5:30, you would have seen a perfectly curated holiday scene. You wouldn't have known the table might as well have been an operating room, and I was about to cut my marriage open in front of witnesses. At 5:45, Ethan straightened his sweater for the 6th time and asked, "Does this look okay?" "You look fine," I said. He frowned at his reflection in the window anyway, smoothing his hair, adjusting his collar. "Sloan always says green's my color." There was that name again, like a splinter. Even Naomi flinched from the couch. I glanced at the clock. 10 minutes. My palms were damp, but my mind felt strangely clear. This was no longer the fantasy version of myself I'd built for him. This was the woman who used to walk into ballrooms and solve 100 problems before the first guest arrived. This was the version he'd tried to bury. The doorbell rang at exactly 6. My heart kicked once, then steadied. Showtime. Ethan practically leaped toward the door, smoothing his sweater, running a hand through his hair. I stayed in the kitchen doorway, hands braced on the counter, watching. He opened the door. His voice shifted, warmer, softer. "Sloan." "Hey." Her laugh floated in, bright and polished. "Merry Christmas." She stepped inside wearing a cream sweater dress that probably cost more than my entire pre-marriage wardrobe. Her hair fell in glossy waves around her shoulders, makeup effortless and precise. She carried a bottle of wine and a small gift bag. She looked like she was walking onto a stage. In a way, she was. Naomi's jaw clenched from the couch. I felt her anger humming in the room like an exposed wire. I smoothed my dress, a deep red he'd once called too loud, and stepped out to greet our guest. Time to welcome the woman who thought she was coming to a private celebration. "Not a trial, Sloan," I said, giving her my most hostess smile. "Welcome. I'm glad you could make it." Her gaze swept over me, the dress, the lipstick, the room. I saw it. That tiny flicker of recalculation. Whatever picture Ethan had painted of me, I wasn't quite matching it. "Maggie," she replied, air kissing my cheek. Her perfume hit me, the same floral note I'd washed out of Ethan's collars. "Your place is beautiful." "Thanks," I said. "It cleans up well." She hesitated, then laughed. Ethan relaxed, like he'd been waiting for that sound. I took the wine from her hand, noting the label. Of course it was expensive. "This is my sister, Naomi," I added, nodding toward the couch. Naomi lifted her glass. "Hey, so good to finally meet you," Sloan said. "Ethan's told me so much about you, I bet he has," Naomi said lightly. Ethan jumped in fast. "Can I take your coat?" "Drink red, please," Sloan said, slipping out of her coat. He hung it carefully in the closet, taking longer than necessary, like the fabric might bruise. We clustered in the living room, talking about flights and holiday travel like this was a normal night. I poured wine, passed glasses, nodded in the right places. Ethan perched on the arm of the chair closest to Sloan. She leaned toward him when she spoke, her hand brushing his wrist once, then again. Naomi caught my eye. One raised eyebrow, one almost smile. A silent question. "You good, dinner will be ready soon," I said. "You guys relax." In the kitchen, I gripped the counter and watched my reflection in the microwave door. My face looked calm, my eyes did not. "You've got this," I told myself under my breath. Laughter floated in from the living room, Ethan's low, Sloane's bright. It washed over me without landing. They were playing the roles they'd written for themselves, They still thought this story belonged to them. Naomi slipped in, closing the door halfway behind her. "Tell me you're not backing out," she murmured. "Not a chance." She exhaled. "Okay, then just say the word when you need me recording." "Wait until I head for the door," I said. "When I say we're waiting on a few more guests, that's your cue." Her eyes widened. "A few more guests, you'll see from the other room," Ethan called. "Babe, need any help?" "I'm good," I answered, smoothing my dress. "Just stay out of the kitchen." For 4 years, he'd trained himself not to step into my space. Tonight, that was going to cost him everything. Dinner began almost tenderly, if you didn't know what was hiding underneath the tablecloth. If you didn't know that 4 out of the 7 seats were occupied by liars, 2 by victims, and 1 by the woman holding the detonator. We moved to the dining table at 6:20, candles lit, silverware gleaming. Ethan guided Sloane to the seat beside him, hand at the small of her back just a little too long, a little too familiar. Naomi shot me a look like she was ready to flip the table, but I nodded once. "Not yet." "Everything looks amazing," Maggie Sloane said, settling into her chair, crossing her legs in one elegant motion. This must have taken all day. Her tone carried that soft condescension only certain people can pull off, the kind that sounds like praise but feels like a pat on the head. "Just a few hours," I replied. With a smile, "I'm used to cooking for crowds." Ethan jumped in. "She's great at all the home stuff," he gestured vaguely. "Hosting, organizing, making things feel put together. Not a single mention of the years I spent running events that cost more than his annual bonus. Not one acknowledgement that I'd once been the woman with headphones, a clipboard, and 3 assistants trailing me like ducklings, while I saved $1 million galas from collapse. To him, I was a curated accessory, functional, pretty, and replaceable. We passed the dishes around, the soft clink of silverware filling the air. The smell of rosemary, caramelized onions, and butter felt almost indecently warm compared to the cold that had been building in my chest all day. "So Sloane said after her first bite, 'Ethan tells me you're from Indiana.'" Her tone made Indiana sound like I'd been raised in a swamp. I smiled. "Born and raised. Cute," she murmured, taking a sip of wine. "I can always tell when someone wasn't raised in the city. There's this openness to them." Naomi coughed into her napkin. "You mean she seems like a human being?" Ethan shot her a warning look. "Naomi," she lifted her hands. "What?" "I'm just saying," Sloane tilted her head, amused. "It's fine. I like straightforward people." She glanced at Ethan, like they shared some private joke about who wasn't straightforward. He laughed. Not loudly. Just enough. Naomi's jaw ticked. I could feel Rose's camera from her hidden angle between the bookshelf and the tree. She'd angled it perfectly earlier, pretending to help me adjust the ornaments, while actually positioning a lens with a full view of the table. I lifted my wine glass and let the stem rest between my fingers. "Sloane," I said lightly. "Ethan mentioned you're settling back into Chicago." "Trying to," she said. "My firm's been keeping me ridiculously busy, and with everything going on at the office, it's been a lot. Everything." She said it like it was vague and boring, like she wasn't sleeping with 2 men from the same company. Naomi stabbed a piece of potato work drama. Sloane waved a hand. "Oh, you know how finance guys are." She glanced at Ethan and laughed. Always convinced they're the smartest person in the room. Ethan grinned back. Not wrong. The 2 of them shared a look, careless, intimate, nauseating. I cut a piece of prime rib, chewed, swallowed. My heart beat steady, strong. My pulse wasn't racing. There was no panic, just an eerie calm. This was what clarity felt like, apparently. Like standing in a storm you had summoned yourself. "So," Maggie Sloane said brightly, "what do you do now?" I dabbed my lips with my napkin. "I manage the home." She nodded slowly. "Well, that's admirable. Not everyone is built for the high-pressure environment Ethan and I work in." Naomi froze mid-chew, closed her eyes, whispered under her breath, "Lord, give me strength." Ethan laughed again, soft, indulgent, like he agreed completely. "Actually," he added, "I've always said Maggie is better suited for a calmer life. Structure." Predictability. That's where she shines, predictable, harmless. Manageable, I see, Sloane said with a sympathetic smile. You must feel a bit out of place at those big industry events, huh? All those heavy hitters? Partners? CEOs. A flash of memory hit me in a black cocktail dress with a clipboard in my hand, giving instructions to a VP who tried to change the seating chart 5 minutes before a keynote speech. I'd handled him, the donors, the lighting crew, the catering crisis, and a leaking champagne tower before dessert. But sure, I'd be out of place. Naomi muttered, she'd run circles around both of you. Ethan ignored her. Anyway, he said, leaning toward Sloane, the holidays are about bringing people together. No drama, no tension. Just good company, Sloane echoed. I set down my fork gently. Actually, I said, standing, we're still waiting on a few more guests. Both of them looked up. Ethan blinked. I smoothed my dress and smiled. You said you wanted tonight to be special, so I took that to heart. Naomi's hand slid into her purse. I saw the edge of her phone. Ready, who else is coming? Ethan asked, confused but not yet suspicious. I glanced toward the door, just as a soft chime echoed through the condo. The doorbell, right on time. My pulse softened. The air in the room shifted. Even the candles seemed to flicker differently. Excuse me, I said, moving calmly, my heels tapping against the hardwood like a countdown clock. Behind me, Sloane's voice wavered. Are you expecting someone? Yes, I said without turning. Someone very important. I reached the foyer, took a breath, opened the door. Daniel Archer stood there in a charcoal coat, dusted with snowflakes, eyes cold enough to freeze a river. Beside him stood Lydia, his wife, wearing a navy wool dress and a face carved from stone. Her lipstick was perfect. Her hands were steady. Mrs. Caldwell, Daniel said, voice clipped. Thank you for inviting us. I stepped aside. Please, come in. The air behind me changed instantly, the way it does when prey senses a predator. Footsteps approached behind me. Ethan's voice tightened. Maggie? Who? He rounded the corner. Stopped dead. Color drained from his face so fast I thought he'd faint. Daniel, Ethan croaked. Sir, what are you doing here? Daniel didn't look at him. Not yet. His eyes were fixed on Sloane. She stood frozen at the table, wineglass slipping from her fingers. The red spread across the white linen like blood. Daniel, she whispered. This isn't what it looks like. His voice was quiet, surgical. No, it's exactly what it looks like. Silence slammed into the room, heavy, electric. No one breathed. Ethan finally found his voice. Maggie, what is this? I turned to him, calm as fresh snow. This, I said, is Christmas dinner. He looked at the 3 extra chairs, the untouched place settings, the camera disguised among the ornaments. Then he realized, too late, much too late, Maggie. He tried again, panic rising in his throat. What did you do? I invited the truth, I said softly. Behind him, Sloane staggered back a step, face crumpling, eyes darting between the 2 men whose lives she'd toyed with. Lydia moved forward, voice quiet but devastating. I wanted to look you in the eyes, she told Sloane. I wanted you to see the woman whose marriage you've been stepping on for months. Sloane's lips trembled. Lydia, please. Daniel cut in. Save it. He reached into his coat, pulled out a thick envelope, dropped it onto the table. It landed with a thud that sounded like a dropped gavel. Proof, he said simply. Ethan stared at the envelope like it might explode. Sloane stared at it like it already had. You have 5 minutes, I said to all of them, to sit down. My tone brooked no argument. No one moved at first. Then Ethan pulled out his chair and sank slowly into it. Sloane collapsed into hers like her knees had locked. Daniel and Lydia took their seats across from them, faces expressionless. Naomi hit the record button, and I walked to the head of the table, the seat Ethan always took. Tonight, it was mine. Let's begin, I said. And the room obeyed. I stood at the head of the table, the candles flickering in front of me like spotlights. 7 faces stared back, some pale, some tight with fury, some trembling beneath masks that were finally slipping. The dining room felt smaller now, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. Before we eat, I said softly, there are some things that need to be addressed. Ethan swallowed hard. Maggie, we don't need to do this. Whatever this is, let's talk privately. No, I said, and the word landed like a gavel. We're done doing things privately. That's how we got here in the first place. Sloane shifted in her chair, grip tightening around her napkin. This is inappropriate. Funny, Naomi murmured. I was thinking the exact same thing about you. Daniel's jaw twitched. Lydia didn't even blink. I placed my hands on the back of the chair in front of me. My pulse was steady. My breathing even. I'd rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in my head. But the reality felt sharper, colder. It felt right. Let's start with the obvious, I said. The affairs. Ethan jerked. Maggie, please, no, I repeated. You don't get to interrupt. Not tonight, I nodded to Naomi. She tapped her phone screen. The first image appeared on the tablet propped discreetly on the table, a photo of Ethan's car parked behind Sloane's building at 114A. Ethan's face drained of all color. Where did you get that? Does it matter? I asked. The next image. The two of them entering the Four Seasons together. Her hand on his back, his arm around her waist. Sloane pressed her napkin to her mouth. Then an image from the River North condo. Daniel's condo. Ethan and Sloane leaving together, her hair mussed, his shirt untucked. Daniel stared at the photo for a long, stony moment. You used my place, he said quietly. My property. My space, Sloane whispered. Daniel, please, I can explain. You can't, Lydia cut in, her voice calm but razor sharp. You can't explain any of this. Ethan leaned forward, palms flat on the table. Maggie, this isn't what it looks like. Stop, I said. Don't insult me with cliches. He froze. I clicked to the next slide. Text messages. On the screen, Sloane's words appeared. Can't wait to finally spend Christmas together. She still has no clue? Ethan's reply. She never does. She's predictable. Pain stung behind my ribs, but it was old pain, dried pain. Pain that no longer had claws. Sloane's next message. Daniel thinks I'm single. He'd never suspect anything. Daniel inhaled sharply, nostrils flaring. The next slide showed Sloane's messages to Ethan. We need her to sign before Q1. She's holding you back. Just push her. She'll fold. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Sloane, he whispered, horrified. But she was staring at the screen like someone else had typed the words. Those were jokes, she insisted weakly. We were venting. No, Daniel said calmly. You were strategizing, and you dragged us into it, Lydia added. Silence thickened. I clicked again. Now came the Amex charges, hotel rooms, jewelry, trips. Thousands of dollars, Ethan told me, were client expenses, his signature on every receipt. Jesus, Naomi muttered softly. You were running a side marriage. Ethan rocked back in his chair as if the weight of his own actions had finally become too much for his spine. This isn't... Maggie, I never meant... Don't talk to her, Naomi snapped. Talk to Daniel. Talk to Lydia. Talk to the people who didn't know they were sharing a mistress. Sloane flinched. Daniel leaned forward. How long? He asked her, voice low. How long were you seeing him behind my back? Sloane's lips parted, but no sound came. Lydia folded her hands. The truth, please, we're tired. Finally, Sloane whispered. A year, 12 months, 52 weeks. My stomach clenched, not from shock, but from validation. I hadn't been crazy. I hadn't imagined the shifting, the distance, the coldness. A year, Daniel repeated, voice flat. In my condo, it wasn't like that, she whispered. It was exactly like that, Lydia said. Tears spilled down Sloane's cheeks, streaking her perfect makeup. Ethan reached for her hand instinctively, and the room froze as if someone had slammed a fist on the brake. Even Sloane stared at him like he'd lost his mind. He snatched his hand back, face burning. I didn't mean... Yes, I said softly. You did. He looked at me then, really looked, and the fear in his eyes told me he finally understood. This wasn't a conversation. This was the unveiling. I turned to the next set of documents. The prenup, Clause 17, the adultery provision. Allison Kerr had annotated each line. Each highlight glowed like neon. Ethan stared at the screen, breathing shallow. You went through our prenup. Yes, I said. I read the contract you hoped I'd never look at again. He scrubbed his hands over his face. This isn't Maggie, please. Can't we? No, I said. You plan to use that document against me. You and your lawyer discussed it. You strategized how to push me into filing first. Daniel's eyes snapped to Ethan. You really are a snake, I clicked again. Financial statements appeared. Rosa's findings. The secret account. The questionable transfers. Funds routed from the company charity to a private holding. Access logs that showed Sloane logging into accounts she shouldn't have had access to. The table practically vibrated from the shift in energy. "What the hell is this?" Ethan demanded, staring at the numbers. "Where did you get these?" "Sources," I said calmly. "That's confidential and illegal," Daniel cut in, his tone icy. "You moved charity funds." "That's not." "It is," Daniel said. "And you did it with her." He pointed at Sloane. Her voice shook. "You can't prove." "We can," I said. "Everything is time-stamped." I slid one more photo onto the screen, her leaving the charity office late at night, keycard in hand. She looked like she might be sick. Ethan slumped back in his chair, hands trembling. "What do you want?" he whispered, voice barely audible. This was the moment, the pivot, the shift in power that changed the air itself. I stepped around the table and stood behind my chair, looking directly at Ethan. "I don't want anything from you," I said. "That's the part you never understood." He blinked rapidly. "But the house? The money? I'm keeping what I deserve," I said, "but I don't want your help, your pity, or your apology." He lowered his gaze. Daniel exhaled sharply. "Maggie, what do you intend to do with this information?" I smiled faintly. "That depends on what?" he asked. "On whether everyone here behaves." A beat of silence. Then Lydia, calm, steady. Lydia placed her hand over mine. "You don't have to protect anyone here," she said softly. "Just do what's right for you." Her support, unexpected, warm, unwavering, gave me a surge of strength I didn't know I needed. I straightened. "Ethan," I said, "this is the last gift I'll give you. I'm not going to destroy your career." His head jerked up, shock flickered. "But make no mistake, you won't destroy mine either," he swallowed. Hard. "I have everything I need to invalidate the prenup," I continued. "And I will. Quietly. Cleanly. Legally." He nodded weakly, relief flickering in his eyes. "However," I added, "if you lie about me once publicly or privately, I will release every file." His relief evaporated, "And it won't be my name on the headlines." I finished. "It'll be yours." And hers. Sloane looked like she might collapse. Naomi whispered. "Holy hell!" Daniel stared at me like I'd grown a second spine. Lydia gave a tiny nod of approval. Sloane sobbed into her hands. Ethan broke. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just broke. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. His voice cracked. He looked small. It was almost sad. Almost. But not enough to matter. I took my seat at the head of the table. Slowly. Calmly. Deliberately. "You're going to leave," I said. "You're going to pack your things tonight. You're going to stay with a friend. You're going to let the divorce happen cleanly, and you're going to stay out of my way." He nodded numbly. "Okay," rasped. "Okay." Sloane looked between the men, between Lydia and me, as if searching for an exit from a burning building. Daniel spoke quietly. "We'll have our own conversation later," Lydia added. "A very long one," Sloane didn't argue. I lifted my glass. For the first time in years, my hand didn't shake. "Merry Christmas," I said softly. No one spoke. No one toasted. No one moved. But the truth had been laid bare. The power had shifted. And the life I'd been buried under had finally cracked open. "Let's eat," I said. Because sometimes the most devastating moments require the calmest voice. Sometimes the victory isn't loud. It's controlled, measured, precise. And as they obeyed, because they always obeyed, I realized something. This wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. The strange thing about the truth is that once it's spoken aloud, the room doesn't go quiet. It doesn't shatter. It doesn't explode. It simply shifts. You can feel the gravity realign, every person pulled toward a new center of power. And on Christmas night, that center was me. After the confrontation, after the photos, the receipts, the messages, the silence, everyone just sat there, stunned. Even the candles seemed to flicker more cautiously, like they, too, understood the seismic rearrangement of the room. Ethan stared at his empty plate, jaw trembling slightly. He wasn't crying. Ethan Caldwell didn't cry, but he looked like a man who had just watched the blueprint of his entire life catch fire. Sloane looked worse. She kept wiping under her eyes, terrified the mascara streaks made her look weak. Weakness was unacceptable for her. It smelled like failure, and Sloane Parker didn't know how to survive without control. Lydia sat with her back straight, hands folded, face unreadable. If pain lived there, it was hidden behind a wall of dignity. Daniel was the opposite, every muscle tight, a storm barely leashed. Not because of Sloane, not really, but because he finally understood how much had been taken from him without his knowledge. Naomi watched all of them like a hawk, her phone quietly recording under the table. Insurance. Evidence. For me. But I was calm, not out of revenge, out of clarity, out of choosing myself for the first time in years. I rose from my chair. The sound was small, but everyone's head lifted at once. There's something else, I said. Every breath seemed to hold its place. I'm not just reacting to what you did, I continued, my eyes on Ethan. I've been preparing. He blinked, confused. Preparing for what? For this, I said. For the moment I could finally stop giving you the benefit of the doubt, I reached for the black binder Allison had given me. Legal documents, timelines, annotated prenup pages, highlighted adultery clauses. I set it on the table with a soft thump. This, I said, is how you lose your power. His brow furrowed. Maggie, we don't need. Yes, I said, we do. I opened the binder to the tab Allison labeled trigger points. I slid it toward him. You planned a strategy to push me into filing first, I said. You texted Sloane about it. You discussed it with your lawyer. You told her I was predictable. His lips parted, but no words came. I'm not predictable, I said. I'm prepared. Naomi whispered. Damn right. Daniel leaned forward, eyeing the documents. Is that the prenup? I nodded. Yes. And the clause that nullifies it if he commits adultery. He broke that clause 100 different ways. I looked at Ethan, so I'm voiding the prenup. Lydia exhaled softly, almost a sigh of relief. Ethan finally found air. Maggie, please, just listen. We can fix this. We can figure this out privately. We can go to counseling. No, I said gently. You don't get to negotiate with me anymore. He looked wounded, like I had just hit something soft inside him. But I didn't feel cruel. I felt done. That was the difference. Daniel cleared his throat. And the financial transfers, I turned to him. Already submitted to my attorney, I said, and Allison is preparing documentation to hand to the board if needed. Sloane stiffened. You wouldn't. Oh, I absolutely would. I said, but I don't need to. Unless Ethan tries to damage my credibility. I looked back at him, which would be unwise. Ethan swallowed. I wouldn't. You already tried. I cut in. You lied to people about me. You implied I was unstable. You told your family I needed structure. You told coworkers I didn't want to work because I was... What was it? I paused. Then, I said his exact phrase. Better suited for simple things. Naomi's jaw dropped. He said that. Oh yes, I said, repeatedly. Ethan buried his face in his hands. The truth was a blade that had waited years for this moment. And now that it was cutting, it cut clean. I'm not using anything against you that isn't factual, I added. I'm not lying. I'm not twisting. I'm just done hiding the truth of who you've chosen to be. Sloane's voice cracked. So what happens to me? For the first time all night, I turned to her. What happens to you? I said softly. Depends on Daniel. Her eyes filled again. Fear this time, not guilt. She looked at him. Daniel, please let me explain. He didn't even look at her. I don't need explanations. I need honesty. And you've never been capable of that. She gasped like he'd struck her. Lydia reached for her water glass. You don't owe her grace, she said quietly. Daniel's voice went ice cold. You built your career on manipulation. On playing two sides. On infiltrating lives. You almost used my position for advancement. Daniel, that isn't... You used me, he cut in, and him, he finally gestured at Ethan. And you're lucky all Maggie wants is her freedom. Silence drowned the room again. For a moment, even the air felt exhausted. I looked at Ethan, not with love, not with hatred, but with something like distant sadness. You told people I was harmless, I said, easy to manage, predictable. His eyes lifted, broken. You were wrong. I finished. He closed his eyes. Sloane whispered. So this is it. This is the counter, I said. This is what happens when you underestimate the wrong woman. My voice wasn't loud, but it shook the walls of that room, and in the center of that silence, I felt something inside me settle. Click into place. Align with the version of myself I should have always been. This was no longer a confrontation. This was checkmate. Ethan didn't speak for a long time. He just sat there, staring down at the tablecloth as if the answer to his life was hidden in the weave of cotton. His fingers twitched, useless, like he was trying to rebuild something out of air. When he finally looked up, his voice was small. "What happens to me now?" Not angry, not defensive, just lost. Once, that tone would have gutted me. Tonight, it barely touched me. "What happens to you," I said gently, "depends on how you behave from this moment forward." He blinked, confused. "I don't understand." "You don't need to," Naomi muttered. "You just need to listen." I pulled a slim folder from the sideboard, one Allison prepared specifically for this moment. I set it in front of him. "These are the terms I'm asking for." I said fair terms. Terms that protect both of us. Terms that make this clean. He looked at the folder like it might bite him. "And if I don't agree," he whispered. I held his gaze. Then quietly I said, "Then I release everything." Daniel nodded once, including the financial transfers, and the photos Lydia added softly, and the messages Naomi chimed in. My allies spoke for me. That felt bigger than victory. It felt like truth made tangible. Ethan's breath hitched. "You wouldn't ruin my entire career." "I wouldn't," I agreed calmly. "Not unless you force my hand." He sagged in his chair, defeated. "I never thought you'd do something like this." "That's the problem," I replied. "You never thought I could." Sloane shifted suddenly, sitting straighter, as if remembering she still existed. "So what happens to me? You're all talking like I'm not even here." Daniel didn't look at her. "You're not my concern anymore," Lydia added. "You'll have to face the consequences of your own choices." "You think I won't recover?" Sloane snapped, the edge back in her voice. "You think this ruins me?" I always land on my feet. Her voice wavered slightly on the last word. "You might," I said, "but not here." She glared at me. "You planned this. You set me up." "No," I said. "You set yourself up. I just made sure the lights were on when the curtain lifted." Her mouth opened, then closed again. No comeback. No poison. Nothing left. For the first time since she'd arrived, Sloane Parker was silent. Lydia reached for her purse and stood Daniel. "Let's go." He rose wordlessly, not even glancing at Sloane. They walked toward the door, shoulders aligned, both dignified in the kind of pain that doesn't make noise. Just before leaving, Lydia turned to me. "You didn't have to include us," she said, "but you gave us the truth." "Thank you." Her sincerity hit deeper than I expected. Daniel paused at the threshold. His voice softened. "If you ever need anything, from the firm, legally, financially, just ask. You earned more than you realize." I nodded. "Take care of yourself, both of you." The door closed behind them with a quiet click, and suddenly, it was just the three of us. Me, my husband, and the woman he threw everything away for. Sloane stood abruptly, grabbing her coat with shaking hands. This isn't, I need to go." No one stopped her. She rushed out of the dining room, heels clicking desperately across the hardwood, and the door slammed behind her with a hollow thud. She was gone. Only Ethan remained. The room felt cavernous. Naomi took a breath, ready to unleash whatever she'd held back all night. But I gave a small shake of my head. "Not now." "Not yet, Naomi," I murmured. "Can you give us a moment?" She hesitated, fiercely protective, deeply suspicious, but finally pushed her chair back. "I'll be right outside," she said pointedly, squeezing my shoulder before stepping onto the balcony and closing the door behind her. The condo fell into a suffocating quiet. Ethan bowed his head, elbows on the table, hands covering his face. "I messed up," he whispered. It wasn't enough, but it was true. I sat across from him, not beside him. "Never again." "You didn't just mess up," I said. "You dismantled us. Piece by piece." He winced. "And the worst part," I continued softly, "you didn't even respect me enough to end things cleanly. You wanted me to break myself so you didn't have to do it." "I wasn't thinking straight," he murmured. "You were thinking exactly straight," I replied. "You just weren't thinking about me." He finally lifted his head. His eyes were red. "I loved you, Maggie. That used to be my undoing. Tonight, it was nothing but a faint echo." "No," I said gently. "You loved the version of me who didn't challenge you." He swallowed. "I never wanted to hurt you," he said. That's the thing about harm, I replied. Intent doesn't erase impact. He nodded miserably. This really it, he whispered, voice breaking. After everything. Is this the end? It was over, I said, the moment you decided I didn't matter. His face collapsed. I didn't revel in it. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt released. We'll finalize everything with the lawyers, I said quietly. Clean, private, efficient. He nodded slowly. And then I said, standing, you'll leave. I didn't shout. I didn't curse. I didn't throw anything. I simply claimed my space, claimed my life. He pushed his chair back, unsteady on his feet. I'll pack my things, for now, I said. Just go. You can come back when I'm gone. He hesitated in the hallway, one last moment where he wanted to say something meaningful, something that would rewrite the ending. But some endings don't need revision. He left. The door clicked shut. Silence settled around me like snowfall, clean, soft, impossibly quiet. And in that silence, I realized something monumental. I wasn't afraid anymore. Not of him. Not of being alone. Not of starting over. The truth had set me free. And the countermove had sealed the board. The morning after Ethan left, the condo felt unreal, too still, too open, too full of echoing quiet. For years, silence in this place used to terrify me. It meant disapproval. It meant walking on eggshells. It meant waiting to be told what I had done wrong. But now, silence felt like oxygen. Cool. Clean. Mine. Sunlight spilled across the hardwood floors in long golden beams, the kind of winter morning light that makes dust look like glitter. I stood in the doorway of my bedroom, arms wrapped around myself, letting the newness of it settle into my bones. Naomi padded out from the guest room, hair a mess, wearing one of my old college sweatshirts. You alive? She asked. Barely, I said, but a smile tugged at my mouth. She walked over and squeezed my arm. Good. Because you scared the hell out of me last night, I know. And she added, raising a brow, I'm proud of you. That sentence hit me harder than anything Ethan said in the last 2 years combined. I leaned my head against her shoulder. Stay a while, I asked. Try getting rid of me, she snorted. For the next few hours, we moved through the apartment together, washing dishes from the dinner that became a courtroom, gathering linens, boxing up the remnants of a life I no longer wanted. Around noon, Naomi left to run errands. And I stood in the middle of the living room, hands on my hips, looking at everything with a slow, assessing eye. The wedding china, gone, packed in boxes and pushed into the guest closet. I'd donate it once the divorce was official. The rug his mother chose, stiff, beige, soulless, rolled up. I would buy something that didn't feel like a museum piece. The framed photo from our honeymoon, which had hung above the fireplace since day one. I walked over, lifted it from the wall, and set it face down on the table. There. Better. The space felt lighter with every small act of reclamation. It felt like I was removing weights I didn't know were attached to me. I brewed coffee strong, dark, the way I like it. Not the weak, watered-down blend Ethan insisted was smoother. I sat on the balcony with a blanket around my shoulders, watching cars move quietly along Clark Street. The cold bit my skin. But inside, something warm was unfolding. Healing doesn't arrive like a sunrise. It arrives like breath. One moment, one inhale at a time. By the end of January, Ethan moved the rest of his belongings out. He didn't speak much, just loaded boxes into a friend's SUV. He looked smaller than I remembered, or maybe I was simply seeing clearly for the first time. We signed temporary agreements through our lawyers. No weapons drawn, no ugly fights. Power is quiet when it's real. In February, I painted the bedroom a deep, teal-rich, calming mine. The color made the space feel reborn. I brought home plants, real art by local women, shelves filled with books I once hid because Ethan said they were too dark. I put up my grandmother's quilt, the one I loved but never displayed because Ethan teased it looked too rural. Now it hung proudly above my reading chair. Piece by piece, I built a home around myself, not around marriage, not around expectations, not around fear. And as the condo transformed, so did I. I began running every morning at sunrise, my breath ghosting in the cold air, my feet pounding pavement that felt like a promise. I felt my muscles grow stronger, my lungs expand, my endurance steady. For years, I'd moved through life carefully. Now I moved with purpose. In March, I launched something new, something born directly from the wreckage Ethan thought would crush me. A consulting service for women navigating prenups, red flags, asset protection, and evidence preparation. Nothing illegal, nothing shady, just clarity, strategies, safety nets. Rosa helped set up secure channels. Allison reviewed legal boundaries. Naomi named it the quiet girl method for women who've been underestimated their whole lives. The first week, 3 women reached out. By the 3rd month, I had 30. Some were scared. Some were angry. Some were ready to burn down their entire lives. All of them were looking for a lifeline, and I became one. Every call, every message, every plan I built with them felt like stitching something back together inside myself. One night, after a long session with a woman whose husband was funneling money to a mistress in Miami, I sat back in my chair and realized Ethan didn't break me. He trained me. He taught me exactly where the cracks were in this world, and I simply learned how to fill them. By June, the sun stayed out longer. I'd settled fully into a version of myself that once felt impossible, self-assured, steady, unafraid. And on a warm Saturday morning, I went for a run, sweat cooling on my skin as I jogged up the stairs to my building. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and breathed in the scent of cedar, lavender, and new beginnings. My phone buzzed. A number I didn't recognize. A single text. I read your story. I think my husband is cheating. I'm scared. I sank into my kitchen chair, heart softening. Then I typed, "You're not alone. Tell me everything." I hit send. Outside, the city hummed with summer life. Inside, the woman Ethan once called harmless had turned herself into a force, and she wasn't going back. By late summer, the shape of my life had changed so completely that sometimes I'd catch my reflection and stop, not because I didn't recognize myself, but because I finally did. It was a strange kind of peace, the kind that doesn't shout, doesn't demand, doesn't apologize, a quiet, earned peace. In July, I redecorated the entire living room. Not expensively, intentionally. The stiff beige rug was replaced with something soft, dark, textured. The couch got new throw pillows in deep green and gold. I framed my own photographs, ones I took on early morning walks around Chicago, moody shots of the lake, sun cutting through buildings, a pigeon mid-flight. They weren't gallery-worthy or whatever Ethan would have said. They were mine. That was enough. Naomi helped me build shelves for my growing collection of client case files, each labeled, anonymized, organized. She called it your war room, which made me laugh. But she wasn't wrong. The women who came to me weren't weak. They were trapped, and I helped them find the hinges on their cages. One woman, a mother of 2, said, "Talking to you feels like climbing toward a window I didn't know existed." Another whispered, "I didn't think anyone would believe me." And a third said through tears, "I finally understand I'm not crazy." Their stories were different, but the feeling was the same. Someone had made them small. Someone had convinced them to shrink. Someone had taught them to doubt their own instincts until the truth felt like a hallucination, and I knew that feeling better than anyone. Helping them became the most meaningful work of my life. Not glamorous, not loud, but real. One afternoon in August, Rosa came by, carrying iced coffees and a folder of updated private investigation licensing guidelines. "You ever think about getting licensed yourself?" she asked, dropping onto my sofa. I laughed. "Me? Private investigator. You already do half the job," she said. "You're smart, discreet, and you pick up patterns faster than anyone I've worked with. That's basically the criteria." I sipped my drink. "Maybe someday." "Not someday," she said. "When you're ready." The idea planted itself quietly, without pressure, just possibility. Around that time, Allison called with an update on the divorce proceedings. "It's moving smoothly," she said. "Cleaner than most. No resistance. You handled this better than 90% of clients I've seen." I leaned back in my chair. "Thank you." "You know what I appreciate most," she added. "You never used revenge as fuel. You used clarity. That's rare." I smiled. I had to learn it the hard way. There were days I barely thought about Ethan, Then there were days when memories surfaced without warning, some soft, some sharp. The way he used to tuck my hair behind my ear, the way he reduced my dreams to sweet ideas, the way his disappointment felt like a weather system that covered the whole apartment. But memories are not anchors unless you let them be. I kept moving. In September, I took a weekend trip to the lake house in Wisconsin, not to reopen old wounds, but to close them. I walked the shoreline alone, letting the wind whip my hair, watching the water churn like it was cleansing itself. I didn't cry. I didn't ache. I just breathed. On the second night, I built a small fire in the outdoor pit. I pulled the last relics of our past old cards, outdated photos, a few letters he'd written during our early dating days, and fed them to the flames one by one. Not out of anger, out of release. When I returned to Chicago, the air felt different on my skin, lighter, cooler, like the beginning of a season that belonged entirely to me. Fall arrived with crisp mornings and heavy sweaters. My running routine became a ritual. Wake at dawn, lace up, inhale the cold, let the city wake up around me. Every step felt like an affirmation. By October, my client list had grown enough that I needed a calendar system, and a whiteboard, and a backup drive. I wasn't running a company, not yet, but the ground beneath me felt like foundation instead of rubble. One evening, after a long session helping a woman organize her divorce documents, I stepped onto the balcony with a mug of tea. The city glowed beneath me. Windows lit like tiny constellations, traffic humming like a steady heartbeat. I wrapped my sweater tighter and closed my eyes. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd find peace after losing everything I thought I needed, I wouldn't have believed them. But loss isn't always destruction. Sometimes it's excavation. Sometimes it clears the debris so you can finally build something that looks like truth. As I stood there, my phone buzzed. A notification from a woman whose husband kept disappearing on weekends. Her message was short. "Are you awake? I don't know what to do." I typed back instantly, "I'm here. Start from the beginning." Because that was my purpose now. To be the voice in the darkness saying, "You're not crazy. You're not broken. You're not alone." And then, as I set the phone down, the city breeze brushing my face, a single thought settled warmly in my chest. They didn't break me. They taught me exactly where to cut. The revenge wasn't ruin. The revenge was peace. And this story, my story, wasn't ending. It was unfolding, one woman at a time. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own home, if you've ever been told to stay quiet, be good, or don't make it a big deal, then you already know how stories like this are born. Before you click away, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. And if you're rebuilding your life too, even in small steps, type brave, so I know you're here. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the women they call harmless, we're just getting started.